Alright, I told you on Wednesday you were going to use the greatest common factor. Today we're going to do a really quick mini lesson. It's review from 4th grade. I know you were taught it, so it shouldn't take too long, about simplifying fractions. Okay? Now remember from our discussion last week and this week that there is only two ways to change a fraction. A fraction is one number. 6/8 is no different than 27. It has two digits. 6/8 has two digits. You can't change the 6 without changing the 8. Whatever you do to the top, you do to the bottom. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. Okay? So if you can only change fractions by multiplying and dividing, and you can only, multiplying only grows numbers, it makes sense that if you're going to simplify, that you've got to divide. It has to happen. If we're going to simplify fractions, we've got to use division. Okay? Now, there are two methods that I like to teach students that involve simplifying fractions. Okay? Simplifying fractions means just that. You're trying to get the fraction into a form where it is the simplest numbers possible. Ideally, two prime numbers, but sometimes that doesn't happen. What it definitely means is that when you simplify a fraction, you put it in a form where there is no common factor between the numerator and the denominator. What I'm going to do for an example is I'm going to ask you to simplify 16/20ths. The two ways that I teach students is that one, you can find the GCF, which tends to be the most efficient. There's going to be the less physical writing work sometimes with that. But if you're not as good with your factors, I like to tell students to divide by what you know. In the instance of 16/20ths, if we were to solve by the GCF, what I would do is I would list all the factors of 16 and 20. Okay? You should be listing those factors. They're 1, 2, 4, 8, and 16 for 16. Factors of 20 are 1, 2, 4, 5, 10, and 20. The common factors, they both have 1, 2, and 4. The greatest common factor would be 4. Now, I know some of you are already ahead of me going, Mr. Marriott, why don't you just divide by 4 to begin with? I'm choosing an easy example because it's easy to illustrate that. Some of the things that you're asked to simplify might not be that easy. So, because the greatest common factor is 4, what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide 16 and 20 both by 4, because if we do it to the top, we do it to the bottom, we do it to the bottom, we do it to the top. That's going to give me 4/5. Now 4 is not a prime number. 4's factors include 1, 2, and 4. It's composite. Prime are numbers like 5 that only have 2 factors. But the only factor they share is 1, so this is in simplest form. So using the GCF, you list the factors of your numerator and your denominator. You identify the greatest common factor between the two of them, and then you divide. It's pretty efficient. But like I said, in some cases you might not be strong with your factors. In some cases the number might be large and you just prefer to divide by what you know. And what I mean by divide by what you know is 16/20ths. I see they're both even. I tell you all the time in class, start somewhere. You know enough math to start somewhere. I might not know the common factor, but I know they're both even. That means I can divide by 2. Let me do that in blue. Well, 16 divided by 2 is 8. 20 divided by 2 is 10. The problem students fall into with dividing by what they know is that sometimes they don't reduce enough. You have to keep reducing until you can reduce no more. So I look at 8 and 10. That's not simplest form because I can divide by 2 again. And that gives me 4/5. All these fractions are equivalent. They all have the same value, but this is the fraction in simplest form. Okay? Remember what I said Wednesday night. When you are making greatest common factor, especially when we're dividing by what we know, I always want you to try to divide by these 5 numbers. Always double check yourself. 2, 3, 5, 7, and 9. Talk more about that a little bit later this week. Depending on where our conversation went on Thursday, I might have already told you why to check by those numbers. Alright? Simplifying fractions is a review. You got to divide. You can either divide by the greatest common factor, or you can divide by things that you know they have in common. This one requires more steps. Big misconception of students is that they stop too soon. If you divide by the greatest common factor, you usually only have to divide once. See you guys Monday.